A new philosophy theorized evil's rights, gloried in the shimmering rot of decadence, or gave to a python force persuasive speech, and armed with knowledge the primeval brute. Over life and matter only brooding bowed, mind changed to the image of a rampant beast. It scrambled into the pit to dig for truth, and lighted its search with the subconscious flares. Thence, bubbling, rose, sullying the upper air, the filth and festering secrets of the abyss. This it called positive fact and real life. This now composed the fetid atmosphere. A wild beast passion crept from secret night to watch its prey with fascinating eyes. Around him, like a fire with sputtering tongues, there lolled and laughed a bestial ecstasy. The air was packed with longings brute and fierce, crowding and stinging in a monstrous swarm, pressed with a noxious hum into his mind, thoughts that could poison nature's heavenliest breath. Forcing reluctant lids, assailed the sight, acts that revealed the mystery of hell. All that was there was on this pattern made. So we are still in this very unpleasant, distressing passages describing Asvapati's experiences when he has to descend right into the darkest, deepest, most disgusting and perverted levels of consciousness, and his search for the root of this evil and falsehood. He's trying to find the root so that he can pull it up by its roots in order to free the world from these terrible things. All the things that are described here do, in fact, still exist in lower levels of consciousness. And when they find an opportunity, they come up and express themselves in our human world. So there have been times and places in our world, in human time, when all these dreadful things which are described here were happening. Will you begin, please, Dana?
The new philosophy theorized evil's rights, glory in the shimmering rot of decadence, or gave to a python force persuasive speech, and armed with knowledge the primeval root. over life and matter, only through involved. This is correct?
Yes.
Mind changed to the image of a rampant beast. It scrambled into the pit to dig for food, and lighter its search with the subconscious place.
I think in this passage, perhaps Sri Aurobindo is referring to the new kind of psychology that developed in his lifetime. This delving into the subconscious through people's dreams and images and so on. That was this new philosophy, this system of psychoanalysis, they call it. It was so fashionable, I think, throughout the 20th century. Whether it is still so, I don't know. But Sri Aurobindo discouraged us from delving into the depths like that. But for a time, many people believed that this was the way to find out what is real, and what is hidden in the lower depths of their consciousness. They found it all very fascinating. So I think that's this new philosophy, which is theorizing. It's making it into a theory, the rights of evil to exist and to influence people. So also around that same time, there were these movements of decadence. Decadence, if we look at the origin of the word, it means crumbling, falling apart. So when we apply it to social periods or social behavior, then we think of the crumbling of all the old higher values, justifying all kinds of things that we would normally think of as misbehavior. And he speaks about this python force. This word python occurs several times in the poem. Here it's a force. A python is a very big kind of snake, a serpent, which is not poisonous, but which gets hold of its prey and crushes it and swallows it. So it's something like that. It's a force which gets hold of people through its persuasive speech. And somehow gives this appearance of advanced knowledge to the parts in us which are really expressions of the primeval brute, the subhuman behavior. So the mind, the human mind, becomes focused only on matter and life, no higher values. The mind is focused, poring over these things. So the mind, for so many years, there'd been the belief and the feeling that human beings are really the highest form of life and almost divine. Art of the Renaissance and a little later, it glorified the human form and human behavior, all this nobility. But now, when it's focused only on matter and these lower life instincts, mind changed to the image of a rampant beast, a beast of prey which is devouring and destroying. That beast, that primeval beast, scrambled into the pit. It's digging down to dig for truth. That's what those psychoanalysts did. They dug down into the depths of people's consciousness and lighted that search for the lower levels, or in the lower levels, with the sort of flaring lights of the subconscious. What comes up in dreams, or if you're in a kind of sleepy state, what kind of images come up. They were very interested in that. So out of that pit, out of those lower levels of consciousness, it's as if we see these volcanic pools where there's bubbling mud, hot mud. No? So it's something like that. It's foul smelling of sulfur. So if you dig down into the pit, that's what you find. Bubbling up, sullying the upper air, dirtying it, comes the filth, the dirt, and festering secrets of the abyss, of the deepest layers. And this can really happen, that one is unfortunate enough to become involved in a society, in a time, in a place where all these lower instincts are dominant. And it really comes that you can't think of anything beautiful and noble anymore. It's as if the whole mental atmosphere gets polluted. But then they say, oh, this is how things really are. This new philosophy calls these things positive fact. That's reality, real life. So this false idea of what is real life made up the atmosphere that Asvapati is experiencing. It's fetid. It has a disgusting smell. And there's something, this intensity, these strong feelings of a wild beast creeping out from the shadows, from the secret night, just watching its prey with fascinating eyes. There's a certain power of attraction that it has. And Asvapati feels all around him, like a kind of fire with sputtering tongues. If you have a fire that's which uses coal instead of wood, or it may happen with wood that has a lot of oils and resins in it, when you burn the wood or the coal, the gases come out sputtering. They come out in little jets, like jets of gas, but burning. So all around him there's something like that, a fire which is almost attacking with these sputtering tongues of flame. And all around him he sees beings who are behaving like animals, lolling, not sitting upright, just rolling on the ground, laughing. A bestial ecstasy, a kind of delight that is beastly. It's something disgusting. The whole air was packed with longings, with intense desires, which are animal-like, brute and fierce. And it's as if he's surrounded with something like a swarm of wasps or beasts, crowding and stinging in a monstrous swarm. These thoughts are pressing with a terrible, noxious, means poisonous hum into his mind. His mind is getting filled with these terrible thoughts, thoughts that could poison even the heavenliest breath of nature. He doesn't want to see all those dreadful things, but it's as if he's forced to see them. His eyes, his eyelids don't want to look at all those terrible things, but they're forced to see these acts, these terrible things that are going on around him all the time, revealing the mystery of hell. How can that strange state exist? So in that realm where he is now, all that was there was on this pattern made. You imagine if you were forced to live even for a little time in such a realm. Artists have made pictures of these kind of things, but Asvapati is being forced to see them and experience them very, very strongly and directly.
A race possessed inhabited those parts, a force
demoniac
lurking in man's depths, that
heaves, that
suppressed by the heart's human law, away by
or this word is awed. There's the word awe, means we feel awe and respect and reverence, awed.
awed by the calm and serene eyes of thought, carrying fire and earthquake of the soul, raise and calling to its native night, overthrow the reason, occupied the life, and stamp its foot on nature's shaking ground. This was for them their being's flaming home.
Yes. So there's a race of beings, like we are the human race. These are a race of demons, evil beings. They are possessed by evil and falsehood. And Sri Aurobindo says, this force demoniac, this evil force, is lurking, is hiding in our deeper, darker parts, in man's depths. But usually in us, it is suppressed. It may heave, it may try to express itself, but most of the time it's suppressed, it's kept down by the action, the pressure of the hearts. The heart's human law won't allow this demoniac force to express itself freely. It is kept in check somehow by a kind of awe, of respect for the calm and sovereign eyes of thought. Our higher mind won't allow that demoniac force to express itself. But sometimes, if there's a fire and earthquake of the soul, if there's a big upheaval in the being, like when a volcano begins to become active, in a fire and earthquake of the soul, that demoniac force can rise up, and then it calls to the night from which it was born, that dark falsehood from where it has been born, its native night. And it can overthrow our calm and sovereign thought, our reason, which tells us we are human beings, we can't behave like this. No? It can overthrow the reason, and it can take possession of our life. It can occupy our lives. And then, when that demoniac force, it can stamp its hoof. These demons, they don't have feet, human feet. They have hooves like animals, usually like a goat's hooves. So it leaves that mark, the mark of the hoof, the animal hoof, on the ground, the basis of nature, which is anyway shaking because of this fire and earthquake. No? This state, this demoniac animal state, perverted animal state, is for them, the beings, the race who inhabited those parts, this is the flaming core of their being. They don't have a heart that can love and feel sympathy. They have this fire, this intense burning fire. Tara, would you read?
A mighty energy, a monster god, hard to the strong, implacable to the weak. It stared at the harsh, unpitying world it made, with the stony eyelids of its fixed gaze. Its heart was drunk with a dire hunger's wine. In others' suffering felt a thrilled delight, and of death and ruin the grandiose music heard. To have power, to be master, was soul virtue and good. It claimed the whole world for evil's living. Its party's greed, totalitarian reign, the cruel destiny of breeding things.
Thank you. Again, we can remember that Sri Aurobindo was writing these lines when things like this were going on in the 1930s, and the time of the Second World War, when demoniac energies were taking possession of much of the world. So those energies were very hard, severe to the strong. But had no mercy or softness at all to the weak. It would just trample them on. And that force stared at the world it has made, that harsh, unpitying world it made. It's looking as if with stony eyes. It's only focused on its fixed idea. And at the same time, it's drawing its strength and energy from a kind of wine, a kind of delight. Its heart was drunk with a terrible hunger's wine, so that it felt delight in the suffering of other beings. And it hears and delights in the grandiose music of death and ruin, when so much of the world was overrun by war and destruction. So to those beings in that world, the only thing that was important and that was valued was to have power, to be master. That was the only kind of good, the sole virtue and good. That force claimed the whole world for evil's living room. The regime that was prevalent in Germany and overrunning much of Europe, they were claiming that we have to have room to live. And so they took that as their excuse to overrun other countries and cause terrible suffering and destruction. And he refers to that, the vocabulary we've got here. It's party. These were political parties. And they wanted, we call them totalitarian, because they wanted to rule totally everything, to control everything. Its party's grim, totalitarian reign was the cruel destiny of breathing things. Human beings could hardly escape from those terrible regimes. Sarojini, you want to read?
All on one land was
Standardized.
Under that
Dictatorships. Yeah, let's have a look at this. You know, so there were these political parties ruling everything, controlling everything. So they didn't allow people to be different. All on one plan was shaped and standardized. Nowadays, of course, when we make things by machines, they have to be standardized, the same shapes. No? But these were crushed. All these societies were crushed under the weight of a dark dictatorship. The leaders of those parties were dictators who didn't allow any freedom of thought or expression. And they were crushing the life out of the nations, leaving them kind of breathless. People could not breathe. So if you lived under one of those regimes, you would have the kind of experience which is described in the next passage. Kamala, would you read?
Its street and house in council and its courts.
Yes, she's in the right place.
Beings he met who looked like living man, and climbed in speech upon high wings of thought, but harbored all that is subhuman,
Vile.
and lower than the lowest reptiles crowd. The reason meant for nearness to the gods and uplift to heavenly, scaled by the touch of mind. Only enhanced by its enlightening ray, the unborn natures were
Monstrosity, yes. So that's how it was. If you lived under one of these dictatorships, the people around you, of course, they look like ordinary human beings. And sometimes they expressed very high idealistic thoughts. They said, we want to create an ideal world. an ideal race of human beings, no? They climbed in speech upon high wings of thought, but in their hearts, in their nature, they're holding on to everything that is subhuman, below humanity, vile, evil, disgusting, lower than the lowest reptiles crawl. If we imagine the little worms that live in mud or compost, no? Lower than that. We are given our human reason, our power of clear thinking. It is meant to lift us up nearer to the divine beings. No? It will uplift us to the heavenly level by the touch of mind. But those beings, those people there, they use that mind power just to make more effective, to enhance with that ray of a certain kind of light the wry monstrosity of their inborn nature. Monstrosity is something that's so ugly and twisted, and wry also means twisted. Their nature was twisted and ugly like that. Whatever fine words they might use, however handsome they might look. So then you might get this experience which is described here, Suresh.
Often the familiar is a strange, joyfully encounter of some dangerous trouble, hoping to recognize the look of light. His vision, warmed by the spirit's inward eye, discovered suddenly a trademark there, or saw with the innocent that cannot help in the some balance of your prayer of
Virile.
form, the demon and the
Goblin.
goblin and
Ghoul. So, it would happen. You'd see somebody who looks familiar. You see the face of somebody you think that you know, and you feel some kind of relief. You see that familiar person at some dangerous turn. You think, oh, here is a friend, and you're hoping to recognize that look of light. But Asvapati would realize suddenly that his spirit's inward eye would warn him that, look, that being, you may think he looks familiar, that he's your friend, but he's stamped with the trademark of hell, of the world of falsehood. Fortunately, Asvapati has this capacity to see with an inner seeing which can't make a mistake. No? He sees, oh, here's somebody who looks very beautiful, very fine, heroic even, but then he will see that that's the outward appearance. Inwardly, this person is like a demon, an evil being, a goblin, a kind of evil spirit that lives underground, supposed to be very cruel beings. And the ghoul. A ghoul, you must have a word for this in your Indian languages. It's a spirit that feeds on dead bodies. A ghoul. Alice, you are up there. Can you go on?
And insolence reigned of cold stone-hearted strength, mighty obeyed, approved by the Titan's law, the huge laughter of a giant cruelty, and fierce, glad deeds of ogre violence. In that wide, cynic den of thinking beasts, one looked in vain for a trace of pity or love. There was no touch of sweetness anywhere, but only force and its acolytes, greed and hate. There was no help for suffering, none to save, none dared resist or speak a noble word. Arms with the
Aegis.
Of tyrannic power, signing the edicts of her dreadful rule, and using blood and torture as a seal. Darkness proclaimed her slogans to the world.
Yes. So that's how it was.
This looks like the suffering of Jesus. It resembles like that.
It's even worse than that. I don't know, I mean, I was born into a time when these things were ruling large parts of the world, and particularly in Europe. And I remember even, before I was really conscious, I was aware that there's some very dangerous power is acting in the world. And now when I read all this, I remember we see film clips. There are even big coffee table picture books with photographs of things that happened in that time. Something so terrible. Sri Aurobindo and the mother saved us from that. They worked so hard through the 1930s and 40s to save the world from these demonic powers. So that's why it's really not very pleasant to go through all this and remember those impressions from a very early childhood of that tyrannical power pressing down, ready to crush everything. So the only thing was force. And force, power, had greed and hate to help it and support it. So there was no help for suffering. If you lived under one of those regimes, where could you turn for help? Nobody to save. Nobody dared to resist. People were so much dominated by fear. They just wanted to keep out of the grip as far as possible. No? So nobody dared to resist. Of course, a few very brave people did resist, but the society as such was dominated by that fear. People didn't dare to resist. Or if they might feel or have some knowledge within themselves, but they didn't dare to speak it out. So the whole world is ruled by darkness. She's carrying an aegis. Actually, the aegis is a very beautiful symbol. It's from Greek mythology. It's the protective power of the goddess of wisdom, Athena. Her shield, and she has a skin which she uses as a cloak. But here it's the aegis, it's the protective cloak, it's protecting only evil. So, darkness. She can just sign the edicts, give the commands of her dreadful rule. And she seals her edicts with blood and torture. Darkness is proclaiming her slogans. All those parties, all those dictatorships, they had their slogans, their words that they would chant. So as a result of that, there's this servile, blinkered silence. Nobody dares to speak a word. Alexander.
A servile, blinkered silence hushed the mind. For only repeated lessons taught, while
mitred,
holding the rude shepherd's staff, falsehood enthroned on bored and prostrate hearts, the cults and creeds that organize living death and slay the soul on the altar of a lie. All were deceived or served their own deceit. Truth in that stifling atmosphere could not live. Their wretchedness believed in its own joy, and fear and weakness hugged their abject depths. All that is low and sordid-thoughted, base, all that is drab and poor and miserable, breathed in a lax content its natural air, and felt no yearning of divine release. Arrogant,
jibing
at more luminous states, the people of the gulfs despised the sun.
Yes. So the mind gets silenced. It doesn't dare to think clearly, to do anything but serve the darkness. Or it just repeats what it has been taught. And then again, this very distressing image. There's the image of the Christian bishop. He's supposed to protect and give light to the people, no? So he's wearing that special hat, that mark of authority. He's holding in his hand the staff, which is the sign of Lord Jesus, the staff which a shepherd uses to protect its sheep and rescue his sheep. No? So these beings are holding these signs of office, no? But they are only representing falsehood. They are throned, they take up positions of power, and they exercise their power over people who don't dare to resist them in any way. The cults and creeds, the religions that organize living death and slay, destroy the soul on the altar of a lie, of an untruth. So in that atmosphere, everybody was deceived, or they accepted that lie. Truth could not live in that stifling atmosphere. Can't breathe, it's stifling. So people were wretchedly unhappy in these conditions. Maybe still like that in North Korea, perhaps. No? Their wretchedness believed in its own joy. They think that, oh, they're very well off and fortunate. Fear and weakness are hugging on, holding on, embracing their abject depths, this low, miserable state that they are in. everything that's low and sordid, dirty, disgusting in thoughts, everything that's base, dishonest, all that is drab, colorless and ugly and poor and miserable, in that air it breathes naturally, feels at home, it's contented, it can relax. It didn't feel any spark of yearning to be free of divine release. The people, the beings who live in those terrible realms and conditions are actually arrogant, proud of their state. They jibe, they mock, they make jokes about more luminous states. These people of the gulfs, these beings who inhabit those lower realms of consciousness, of falsehood, they despise the light of the sun. They prefer the darkness. Would you like to read, Ma? Yes.
A barriered autarky excluded light, fixed in its will to be its own great self. It vaunted its norm unique and splendid type. It soothed its hunger with a plunderer's dream, flaunting its cross of servitude like a crown. It clung to its dismal, harsh autonomy. A bull throat bellowed with its brazen tongue, its hard and shameless clamor filling space and threatening all who dared to listen to truth, claimed the monopoly of the battered ear. A definite acquiescence gave its vote, and ragged dogmas shouted in the night, kept for the fallen soul once deemed a god, the pride of its abysmal absolute.
An autarky, it's self-rule. But this is barriered, it's protected and surrounded by barriers which keep out all light. It's determined, it's fixed in its will to be its own grey self, this barriered autarky. It thinks, it boasts about the way that it is as something unique, such a splendid, higher type of being. It soothed its hunger with a plunderer's dream. A plunderer is somebody who takes and destroys the belongings of other people. It is actually carrying a cross of servitude. Those beings are not free in any way, but they act as if it's a glorious crown they're wearing. But they cling to this dismal, harsh autonomy. And we can hear recordings of those bull throats bellowing with their brazen tongue, shouting, loudspeakers, everybody for miles around hearing those terrible slogans that they're shouting. A bull throat bellowed with its brazen tongue, its hard and shameless clamor filling space and threatening all who dared to listen to truth. There were some brave souls who clung to truth, but they were very much under threat. That brazen voice, it says, listen only to me. The ears can't hear anything else. The battered ears. So people were completely deafened, carried away by the sound of those terrible voices, and so if they were asked to choose, they voted for those clamoring voices, those braggart dogmas, bragging how powerful, how wonderful they are, shouting in the night. All these terrible powers, all that they are keeping for the fallen soul that was once something divine, is the pride of this terrible fallen state. It's terrible to go through all this, but Mother says we shouldn't forget that these things have happened. It should be remembered as a kind of warning that not to let it happen again. Let us not pretend that it didn't happen, that these things haven't been, that these things don't exist, these possibilities don't exist. They do. There's something in the depths of our human consciousness which accepts these things. And so there's always the possibility of them rising up and dominating groups of people, certain countries, at different times. And as I say, Sri Aurobindo seems to have been writing these cantos at a time when such things were really dominating the human world. So we'll stop there for today. Next week we can perhaps complete this canto, but then we have to move on to Canto 8, which in some ways is even worse. Yes. But at the very end of Canto 8, King Aswapati does find what he's looking for. He finds the secret key of nature's change, and then everything changes, at least for him.
Even at the end of this canto, gives some relief by his strain.
Yes, that's it. We can look forward to that. The last page and a half of this Canto 8. Right.
For me, it's too much.
Yeah, it's almost too much.
This makes me suffer.
Yes.
Accept.
Because I think you are like me. You come from a generation. We're carrying the knowledge of all this since we were tiny children. So, how grateful we must be to Sri Aurobindo and the Mother that they used all their force, all their divine knowledge and light to save the world from this falsehood. Thanks to Sri Aurobindo. A new philosophy theorized evil's rights, gloried in the shimmering wrought of decadence, or gave to a python force persuasive speech, and armed with knowledge the primeval brute. Over life and matter only brooding, bowed, mind changed to the image of a rampant beast. It scrambled into the pit to dig for truth, and lighted its search with the subconscious heart's flares. Thence bubbling rose, sullying the upper air, the filth and festering secrets of the abyss. This it called positive fact and real life. This now composed the fetid atmosphere. A wild beast passion crept from secret night to watch its prey with fascinating eyes. Around him, like a fire with sputtering tongues, there lolled and laughed a bestial ecstasy. The air was packed with longings brute and fierce, crowding and stinging in a monstrous swarm, pressed with a noxious hum into his mind, thoughts that could poison nature's heavenliest breath. Forcing reluctant lids, assailed the sight acts that revealed the mystery of hell. All that was there was on this pattern made. A race possessed inhabited those parts. A force demoniac lurking in man's depths that heaves suppressed by the heart's human law, awed by the calm and sovereign eyes of thought, can in a fire and earthquake of the soul arise, and calling to its native night, overthrow the reason, occupy the life, and stamp its hoof on nature's shaking ground. This was for them their being's flaming core. A mighty energy, a monster god, hard to the strong, implacable to the weak, it stared at the harsh, unpitying world it made with the stony eyelids of its fixed idea. Its heart was drunk with a dire hunger's wine. In others' suffering felt a thrilled delight, and of death and ruin the grandiose music heard. To have power, to be master, was sole virtue and good. It claimed the whole world for evil's living room. Its party's grim totalitarian reign, the cruel destiny of breathing things. All on one plan was shaped and standardized under a dark dictatorship's breathless weight. In street and house, in councils and in courts, beings he met who looked like living men, and climbed in speech upon high wings of thought, but harbored all that is subhuman, vile, and lower than the lowest reptiles crawl. The reason, meant for nearness to the gods and uplift to heavenly scale by the touch of mind, only enhanced by its enlightening ray their inborn nature's wry monstrosity. Often a familiar visage studying, joyfully encountered at some dangerous turn, hoping to recognize a look of light, his vision warned by the Spirit's inward eye, discovered suddenly hell's trademark there, or saw with the inner sense that cannot err, in the semblance of a fair or virile form, the demon and the goblin and the ghoul. An insolence reigned of cold, stone-hearted strength, mighty, obeyed, approved by the Titan's law, the huge laughter of a giant cruelty, and fierce glad deeds of ogre violence. In that wide cynic den of thinking beasts, one looked in vain for a trace of pity or love. There was no touch of sweetness anywhere, but only force and its acolytes, greed and hate. There was no help for suffering, none to save. None dared resist or speak a noble word. Armed with the aegis of tyrannic power, signing the edicts of her dreadful rule, and using blood and torture as a seal, darkness proclaimed her slogans to the world. A servile, blinkered silence hushed the mind, or only it repeated lessons taught, while mitred, holding the good shepherd's staff, falsehood enthroned on awed and prostrate hearts, the cults and creeds that organize living death and slay the soul on the altar of a lie. All were deceived or served their own deceit. Truth in that stifling atmosphere could not live. Their wretchedness believed in its own joy, and fear and weakness hugged their abject depths. all that is low and sordid-thoughted, base, all that is drab and poor and miserable, breathed in a lax content its natural air, and felt no yearning of divine release. Arrogant, jibing at more luminous states, the people of the gulfs despised the sun. A barriered autarky excluded light, fixed in its will to be its own grey self. It vaunted its norm unique and splendid type. It soothed its hunger with a plunderer's dream. Flaunting its cross of servitude like a crown, it clung to its dismal, harsh autonomy. A bull throat bellowed with its brazen tongue. Its hard and shameless clamour filling space and threatening all who dared to listen to truth, claimed the monopoly of the battered ear. A deafened acquiescence gave its vote, and braggart dogmas shouted in the night, kept for the fallen soul once deemed a god, the pride of its abysmal absolute.